7 Cold Cases That Were Solved in 2023 Part 2. 1. Vicky Lin Bel. Sheriff Troy D. Barry has announced an arrest has been made in the death of Vicky Lin Bel, who was found murdered 44 years ago in a wooded area on Metropolitan Church Road and Bryans Road, MD. This case occurred more than 4 decades ago, and yet the detectives and forensics personnel never gave up. They continuously looked for ways to identify a suspect. This arrest serves as a reminder of our commitment to doing everything we can to solve crimes. We never give up. We never stop seeking justice for victims, said Sheriff Barry. The facts of the case are as follows. On Tuesday, August 28, 1979, Vicky Lin Bel was reported missing to the Prince George's County Police Department by her then boyfriend. The two had last seen each other the day before at the Department of Agriculture, where they both worked. Belk never returned to her apartment in Suitland, MD, on Wednesday, August 29th, at 7 p.m. A local teenager was riding his bike in the area of Metropolitan Church Road and Route 227 when he noticed a body on the ground in a wooded area about 20 feet off of the roadway. He went home and called 911. Officers from the Charles County Sheriff's Office arrived and determined the case appeared to be a murder. On August 30th, detectives positively identified the woman as Vicky Lin Bel. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Baltimore ruled the manner of death a homicide and the cause of death a gunshot wound. During the initial investigation, investigators were proactive in recovering, processing, and maintaining evidence. Investigators worked with allied agencies and forensics labs, pursuing leads. However, the case eventually went cold. In the years that followed and as time moved forward, several detectives, many who have since retired, worked the case. Over the last several years, Detective Sergeant John Elliott of the CCSO's Criminal Investigations Division continued the investigation and worked with various agencies, pursuing all leads to no avail. As forensic technology advanced, the evidence in Belk's homicide continued to be re-examined, a measure of commitment between the detectives and forensic personnel, who continuously review cold cases to assess if evidence can be re-evaluated using new technology. In early 2022, the CCSO's Forensic Science section re-evaluated evidence in Vicky's case. Her clothing was submitted for testing using newer technology and a profile was developed and entered into the Combined DNA Index System CODIS, which is a national DNA database. On November 1, 2022, Noel Gehrman, Deputy Director of the CCSO's Forensic Science section, was notified of a DNA match between the profiles developed from the evidence obtained from the Belk case and convicted offender, Andre Taylor, 62, of Washington, D.C. Upon receiving the match, detectives began investigating Taylor's background and his ties to Bryans Road, MD. Detectives learned Taylor's DNA was added to the national database after he was arrested for violent crimes that occurred in Washington, D.C. Further, Taylor's address on arrest records from the 1980s showed he lived at a residence in Bryans Road, MD, an address that was less than 4 miles from where Vicky was found. Once Taylor was identified, investigators began trying to locate him. However, he had no known address since 2019. Detectives worked with law enforcement partners at the United States Homeland Security Investigations, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department Homicide, and the U.S. Secret Service Baltimore Field Office, who assisted investigators throughout the investigation and helped obtain a search warrant for his DNA based on the collaborative efforts. And after months of trying to locate Taylor, investigators found him in Washington, D.C. On June 16, the Charles County State's Attorney's Office presented the case to a Charles County grand jury, which indicted Taylor on charges of first-degree murder, first-degree rape, and second-degree rape. On June 22, Taylor, who was living in Washington, D.C., was arrested by detectives assigned to the CCSO's Criminal Investigations Division. CCSO's Warrant/Fugitive Unit, the United States Marshals Service Capital Area Regional Fugitive Task Force, and members of the Metropolitan Police Department, he was taken to a detention facility in Washington, D.C. On June 27, Taylor waived extradition and was transported to the Charles County Detention Center, where he was charged. Taylor is currently being held without bond. In 1979, Vickie Belk was 28 years old, and Andre Taylor was 18 years old. A review of the original report and investigative efforts since 1979 showed there is no information to indicate Andre Taylor and Vickie Belk knew each other. The circumstances of the crimes in which Taylor was arrested in Washington, D.C. are not similar to the Belk murder. At this time, Taylor has not been linked to other cases. 2. Lady of the Dunes. On the 26th of July, 1974. A little girl was taking her dog for a walk on the beach when he suddenly began barking and pulling her along the sand dunes. The unimaginable brutality of the scene she walked into would haunt her forever. Laying face down on the sand was the badly decaying and insect-infested corpse of a woman. Her naked body was posed on a green towel and both of her hands were cut off at the wrists, while her head had been almost completely decapitated. The killer also pulled out her teeth, likely an extra step to ensure she could not be identified. Her auburn hair had been slicked back into a ponytail and her toenails had been painted pink. A blue bandana and a pair of Wrangler jeans were folded up like a pillow under her head. Police were unable to determine the identity of the mystery woman, and she was buried just over 2 months later in October 1974. It was horrifying. "There's no doubt about it," said Sandra Lee, the woman who discovered the body when she was just 9 years old. "I looked into the brush, and I saw at that point in my life the single most gruesome sight I had ever seen. She was naked. I could see an injury to the right side of her head, and a little bit of a slice, which I believe they tried to cut her head off." For 48 long years, she was known only as the Lady of the Dunes, a name that would plague the small town of Provincetown in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, forever. While the case went cold, detectives never stopped trying to uncover the truth, with authorities exhuming her remains in 1980, 2000, and 2010 in the hopes of finding clues, but to no avail. Using her skull, sketches were created, later followed by high-tech computer-generated images. However, nobody seemed to recognize her face. Over the years, police pored over the mountains of tips and potential leads that came through, including one that suggested the woman may have been an extra on the set of Jaws, as they had filmed the classic movie in 1970 for not far from where her body was discovered. Her grave remained nameless. The simple epitaph reading "Unidentified female body, found Race Point Dunes, July 26, 1974. As is with most cold cases, many had lost all hope that this harrowing investigation would ever be solved. It had become one of the biggest mysteries in America, gripping the nation for half a century. But then in October 2022, there was a major breakthrough. Thanks to the power of modern technology, police were able to finally identify the mystery woman as Tennessee-born Ruth Marie Terry, who was 37 years old when she was killed. She was identified using Investigate genealogy, which combines the use of DNA analysis with traditional genealogy research and historical records to generate leads for unsolved violent crimes. Their research led them to a Richard Hanchett, who was actually Ruth's biological son. She gave birth to Richard in 1958 when she was 22 years old. However, due to financial difficulties, she placed him with a co-worker who adopted him. The news came as a shock to her Richard, who had only learned his mother's identity at the same time he found out she was a noted murder victim. "It hurts," said Hanchett in an interview with NBC 10. After the news of the breakthrough in his mother's murder case broke. "A horrible thing happened to my mom in a beautiful place. She was a beautiful person and I wish I could have gotten to know her." The year before Ruth was killed, she tried to reach out to her son, who was a teenager at the time, but he was not ready to connect. "It was a brutal death," FBI Boston Special Agent in charge Joe Bonavolonta said at the time. For the last 48 years, investigators with the Massachusetts State Police and Provincetown Police Department have worked tirelessly to identify her through various means. including neighborhood canvases, reviews of thousands of missing persons cases, clay model facial reconstruction, and age regression drawings. This is, without a doubt, a major break in the investigation that will, hopefully, bring all of us closer to identifying her killer. When asked if the woman's disappearance was ever reported, police noted that a member of her family did try to find her years ago, after determining themselves that she went missing. Her identification was the key to finding her killer. Just 10 months later, in late August 2023, Ruth Marie Terry's murderer was finally found after 49 years of mystery. As it turns out, police have confirmed that the person who killed Ruth was actually her husband, Guy Rockwell Moldavine, newly married in Reno, Nevada, in early 1974. Ruth and Guy went on their honeymoon that summer. The Cape and Islands District Attorney's Office said in a press release, he returned home alone, telling her family they had a fight and that he never heard from her again. Based on the investigation into the death of Miss Terry, it has been determined that Mr. Moldavine was responsible for Miss Terry's death in 1974. The DA's office said in a statement, as they announced the case was closed. Moldavine passed away in 2002, without ever serving time or being brought to justice for the murder of his wife. Police have not revealed how they made the discovery that he was the killer, or the exact circumstances or on what led to Ruth's death. Moldavine was a one-time successful antique dealer, who was also an artist, actor and poet, according to his obituary, and died in 2002 at age 78 in Salinas, California, after a lengthy illness. He was 52 at the time he murdered his wife. Moldavine was previously the focus of an investigation into the killing of another one of his ex-wives and his stepdaughter in Seattle in 1960, but was never charged with their murders. News reports from the time show that, after the women went missing, human remains were found in the septic tank of the family's home. Moldavine was arrested by the FBI and charged with unlawful flight for not giving testimony related to the mutilation of human remains. He was later found guilty of grand larceny, but had his sentence suspended after 15 months in jail, according to the Seattle Times. Ruth Marie Terry would be 85 years old if she was still alive today. Family member Jen Terry described her as beautiful and caring. She was a free spirit. When her son Richard was asked if he has found any peace after the case was closed, he confirmed he had. Yeah, there is actually. It's the fact that we found her and she's not missing anymore, he said. I just wish I could have met her once. Despite the sad outcome of the case, Ruth's family says they are beyond grateful that she was never forgotten. 3. Barbara Villarreal. Someone has thought of Barbara Faye Villarreal every day since November 7, 1986, for almost 37 years. Her family has revisited photographs and memories they've tucked away in boxes. Some of their favorite things include a newspaper clipping of a 9-year-old Villarreal and her older sister Kathy in the winning performance at a 4-H talent show, the group photo from her high school graduation, where she donned a silky yellow cap and gown, with her signature large-frame glasses, white smile and short curly hair, and the autograph she got from Patrick Duffy, the heartthrob actor in her favorite show, Dallas. But as Villarreal's loved ones focused on happy times with her, Garland police detectives thumbed through files and notes, hoping to find new information that could lead them to the person who killed her. Villarreal was 27 when she died. Officers found her body in a back room of her home in the 3600 block of Colbeth Street. She had been stabbed numerous times, and a large kitchen knife was left nearby, according to police. Her 32-year-old husband was arrested on investigative charges of murder the night of the killing, according to a November 9, 1986, article in the Dallas Morning News. Police said at the time that he told neighbors he found her body and asked them to call 911 because there was something wrong with his wife. The husband was later cleared of any charges in the slaying. It would be more than 3 decades before another arrest was made in the case, and it was someone Villarreal knew well, her husband's brother. Police collected blood at the scene that didn't come from Villarreal. but the DNA evidence couldn't be linked back to her brother-in-law Laurel Jee until recently. The 86-year-old was indicted by a Dallas County grand jury in May and arrested July 18th in Lovington, NM, after he crossed the border from where he lives in Mexico to celebrate his birthday with family in the U.S. Now Villarreal's relatives, including her 92-year-old mother, are waiting for the next steps in the justice system. Connors is expected to be extradited to Dallas County, but was still in custody in New Mexico on Wednesday. Villarreal was part of a big, tight-knit Midwestern family, growing up in the countryside outside of 12 Mile, and Villarreal, usually called Barb or Barbie, especially when she was little, was the youngest of 4 kids. From her mother's marriage with her father, who died when she was a few years old, her mother remarried and added 2 more siblings to the group. One of her older sisters, Kathy Browning, told the news they had a simple but happy childhood in the 1950s and 60s. They rode bicycles to their grandparents' corner store to get candy, went fishing and swam in a pond near their house, and spent most Sundays and every holiday with the extended family that included a sizable gaggle of cousins. She said their nuclear family was more on the reserved side. But as far as once you get to know us, we're very friendly and are loyal friends, Browning said. And as typical for introverts, we don't have lots of friends, but deeper relationships with fewer friends. One of Villarreal's closest friends was Lisa Nugent, who Villarreal met after moving from Illinois to the Dallas area with her husband. The women worked together at oil consulting company DeGolyer and McNaughton in Dallas. Nugent said Villarreal was in the accounting department, down the hall from where she was an assistant to upper management. The two would eat lunch together almost every day. And when Villarreal mentioned missing her family, Nugent went out of the way to invite her to spend time with hers. Barbara was sweet, kind, smart, a great friend, a great employee. Honestly, I cannot think of any fault she had, Nugent said. We had fun together and I have missed her so much over all these years. She was a wonderful friend to me and I was blessed. Villarreal's relatives continue to carry memories of her with them. They cook recipes she shared with them. And they reconnected with the family who adopted her Pomeranian, Cammy, after her death. One of her nieces gave her daughter a middle name that begins with a B in honor of her great-aunt. Key information leading to an arrest in Villarreal's killing slowly came together in recent years. Detectives discovered her husband's true name was Jesus Connors, not Jesse or Domingo Diaz Villarreal, as he was known, and new progress in DNA testing was finally able to connect the blood found at the scene to his brother. Laurel Connors admitted to fatally stabbing Villarreal after he was arrested last week. According to police, the motive in the killing remains unclear, though police have said it stemmed from a family dispute. Garland Police Detective Lucas Shoup first reviewed Villarreal's case in late 2019 or early 2020. He told the news, saying it was a surreal feeling to be able to make the arrest so many years after the killing. I would like to think this case could show the public that police departments don't forget, and that they do continue to work and try and bring some sort of closure to the families, he said. Members of Villarreal's family told the news that the arrest has brought some closure, but her younger brother Mark Dunderman said it doesn't change much else. Dunderman, who lives in Indiana, visited with Garland detectives multiple times about his sister's case in recent years. It doesn't fix what happened, but it does give us enough so at least we don't walk through life with questions anymore, he said. For Laurel Jee Mitchell, on the evening of August 6, 1975, Laurel Jee Mitchell left the Epworth Forest Church Camp in North Webster, and where she worked at the snack bar, to meet friends at a nearby amusement park. She never made it. Ms. Mitchell's body would be found the following day in a nearby river. Alongside her was a class ring with the initials LJM. She was 17. The initial autopsy report ruled the cause of death in the homicide was drowning and indicated that her death occurred rapidly, according to a police affidavit filed in Noble County Circuit Court. It said that she made a violent struggle to survive for decades. Police investigated the killing but were unable to solve it. Then, on Monday, The Indiana State Police arrested two men who had been among the suspects for several years and who live within driving distance of the crime scene. The men, Fred Bandy Jr. of Goshen and John Wayne Lehman of Auburn, and both 67, were charged with first-degree murder in the case. They appeared in Noble County Court on Wednesday and pleaded not guilty. After nearly 50 years and advancements in technology, DNA evidence provided the missing pieces of the puzzle to link the two men to the victim. The authorities said. Capt. Kevin Smith, of the state police, said at a news conference on Tuesday that science finally gave us the evidence we needed, and credited the Indiana State Police Laboratory Division for its help in the case. We simply could not solve this case without them, he said. Captain Smith, who had been working the cold case for 20 years, said the investigation into Ms. Mitchell's killing had followed a similar pattern of other such cases. Witnesses pass away, memories fade, all those hurdles make it very difficult, he said, especially when you go back this far, over 5 decades. Investigators from multiple state and local agencies tried to solve her murder, but to no avail, and Laurel's family would continue to suffer with no answers, Captain Smith said. Ms. Mitchell's younger sister, Sarah Knisley, was 12 years old when she was killed. In an interview with the New York Times, Ms. Knisley described their childhood in North Webster as typical before horror visited her family. It was just a very small town, laid back. He felt safe. She said, we came and went as we pleased in the summer and parents didn't worry about us. But when Ms. Mitchell did not return home by curfew that night in August 1975, Ms. Knisley's family knew something was wrong, prompting an extensive search by the police, family members, and friends. The next day, a family friend picked Ms. Knisley up early from softball practice. They arrived home to a driveway full of police cars. She was a really good person. It's like, gosh, you picked somebody really good to do this to. Somebody who could have done a lot of good in this world, Ms. Knisley, 60, said. I'm very glad they were finally arrested and very appreciative of the people who came forward. All of the clothing and belongings found on Ms. Mitchell's body had been preserved for DNA testing, including shoes, a sweatshirt, bra, underwear, and denim jeans, the affidavit said. The immediate investigation by the Indiana State Police was able to determine that on the night of her disappearance, Ms. Mitchell was supposed to meet friends at Adventureland, which was on the north side of North Webster, about a half-mile walk from the church camp. At the time, the police interviewed a North Webster resident who reported what he thought sounded like someone slamming the trunk of a car, possibly an Oldsmobile. Another resident told investigators that she had heard several voices say let's get or let's get her, but the investigation proceeded in fits and starts. From 2013 to 2019, several witnesses came forward and told the police of instances right after her murder, when Mr. Lehman or Mr. Bandy had admitted to killing Ms. Mitchell. In one of those instances, a woman who went on a date with Mr. Lehman said he discussed his involvement in a crime with Mr. Bandy and offered details that matched the anatomical findings. In the autopsy report, the affidavit said, in 2019, Captain Smith resubmitted some of Ms. Mitchell's clothing to the state laboratory for DNA testing. The findings produced a male DNA profile that was found on Ms. Mitchell's clothing, in addition to Mr. Bandy and Mr. Lehman. The investigation generated 3 other potential suspects, the affidavit said. But all 3 of those additional suspects were eliminated as possible contributors of the DNA obtained from her clothing. Late last year, the Indiana State Police obtained a DNA sample from Mr. Bandy, the affidavit said, on January 13th. The state laboratory found that Mr. Bandy was more likely to be the contributor of the DNA found on Ms. Mitchell's clothing than any other person. There was no mention of a DNA match to Mr. Lehman in the affidavit. Police records also showed that Mr. Bandy drove a 1971 Oldsmobile at the time of Ms. Mitchell's murder. Mr. Bandy has a previous record of child molestation. In 2001, he pleaded guilty to child solicitation and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. In 2016, He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of child molestation and served nearly 6 years. While the Indiana State Police declined to comment on the techniques used to solve Ms. Mitchell's murder, Ashley Hall, the director of the Forensic Science Graduate Program at University of California, Davis, said the method seemed to be a standard genetic identification technology used in crime labs. Called STR, or short tandem repeat, the technology is developing to become more and more sensitive. It is being developed to pick up smaller and smaller amounts of DNA, Dr. Hall said. We can pick up much more DNA than we used to be able to. Ms. Mitchell's case is a good example of the power and evolution of DNA testing to assist in criminal investigations, Dr. Hall said. We're not done with our work until every family, every victim, has an answer, and the fact that we can go back to cases that are this old. This is where we should be going, she said. The detective work to solve the case was unrelenting, the authorities and family said. Ms. Knisley noted how Captain Smith had carried around big books that detailed the names and addresses of everyone the authorities had interviewed over the years. There were over 1,000 names in there, she said, when Captain Smith called Ms. Knisley and her brother, Bruce Mitchell, to let them know they had arrested 2 men in their sister's murder. She was surprised, but mostly wished her parents had been alive to see it. It's been 47 years, she said. But right now it feels like yesterday. 5. Pamela Lin Conyers. More than a half-century after Maryland high school student Pamela Conyers was found strangled to death following her disappearance from a local shopping mall. Law enforcement officials announced Friday that they finally solved the case, but the suspect, Forrest Clyde Williams III, whom detectives identified using DNA technology and genetics research, died in 2018 of natural causes. Officials haven't linked him to other unsolved crimes, leaving many unanswered questions for residents of the close-knit suburban community outside Baltimore. The night of Conyers' disappearance, the 16-year-old attended a high school pep rally and then drove to the mall. Her parents reported her missing when she never returned from running errands. 4 days later, authorities discovered her body in a wooded area not far from the family car she had been driving. There was no evidence to suggest Conyers knew her accused killer, and Arundel County police officials said at a news conference Friday. They also said they haven't ruled out the possibility that another suspect was involved, meaning the case is not yet considered closed. Federal and local officials praised detectives for pursuing a decades-long search for justice in the case. We are pleased to deliver a measure of justice for Pamela Conyers and her loved ones, said FBI agent Tom Sabachinsky. Cases may grow cold, investigators may change, but this proves that for law enforcement, victims are never forgotten. Detectives use DNA analysis and a process called investigative genetic genealogy, both of which didn't exist when Conyers was killed in 1970, Sabachinsky said. When investigators collected evidence from the 1970 crime scene, they had no idea how it might later be used. But cold case detectives recently developed a DNA profile that they compared to information available in publicly accessible genealogical databases. Officials said that allowed them to identify potential relatives of the suspect, create a family tree and ultimately pinpoint Williams. He declined to specify which relatives led them to Williams or describe the process in detail. But Sabachinsky said the case demonstrates how evolving technology allows law enforcement to solve cold cases, a process that has given hope where previously there may have been none. Such genealogic investigations have revolutionized cold case investigations across the country in recent years, though privacy advocates have expressed concern about the implications of law enforcement accessing public genealogy databases. And Arundel County officials provided little information about Williams, saying only that he had a sparse criminal history and spent most of his life in Virginia. He was 21 when Conyers was killed. Officials said his family moved to Maryland when Williams was a teenager and he attended an Arundel County high school. He moved back to Virginia sometime later. Police presented an old mugshot of Williams from the early 1970s. saying he was arrested locally on minor counts, including drunk and disorderly conduct. Online court records didn't include a reference to that arrest, though they show he received a citation for fishing without a license in 1990. Calls to phone numbers associated with his relatives weren't immediately returned Friday. Williams was survived by 2 children and many other relatives, according to his obituary. If he were still alive, he would have been charged with the murder of Pamela Conyers, an Arundel County Police Chief Amalwad said during the Friday news conference. Officials said the Conyers family had requested privacy. Michael Golden, a high school classmate of Conyers, said the announcement brought some sense of closure, but also raised more questions. Golden attended the news conference with his high school yearbook in hand, opening it to a photo of Conyers. "It's still frustrating, because I don't know anything about this guy," he said of the suspect. "It's something all of our classmates have been grappling with for all these years." 6. Jennifer Odom. A Florida man has been charged with murder in the 1993 death of 12-year-old Jennifer Odom, a Tampa area girl who had disappeared after getting off her school bus, authorities said Thursday. A grand jury indicted Jeffrey Norman Crum, 61, on charges of murder, kidnapping, and sexual battery in connection with Odom's killing. Bill Gladson, state attorney for Florida's 5th Judicial Circuit, said in a news conference, Crum has been in prison since 2019, serving to life sentences for sexual battery in a separate case. According to state prison records, CNN has not been able to identify legal representation for him. Investigators identified Crum as a suspect in Odom's killing after noticing significant similarities between the circumstances of her death and the details of a separate case, in which Crum was identified as a suspect through DNA analysis. Hernando County Sheriff L. Lynn has said, Odom was abducted in February 1993 after stepping off her school bus in Pasco County north of Tampa. According to the sheriff's office, her body was found in a field 6 days later in neighboring Hernando County, and it appeared she had been brutally attacked. Lynn has said, "We're not exactly sure how long her abductor kept her captive, or when exactly the murder took place, but we are relatively confident the murder took place in that field," Lynn has said. Odom's disappearance sparked a manhunt, in which several law enforcement agencies in the Tampa area were searching for a blue truck that the child's classmates saw as she walked away from the bus, the sheriff said. Dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of items were tested and retested every time a new technology came out. Thinking that little glimmer of hope that we might be able to get that smoking gun, Lynn has said. A break in the case happened in 2015, when investigators used DNA analysis to narrow down Crum as a suspect in a different case that happened about 13 months before Odom's killing, the sheriff said. Default text in that case: a teenage girl was attacked and sexually assaulted after getting off a school bus in Pasco County. She was left for dead but survived, he said. Investigators noticed the circumstances of the 2 attacks were almost identical, the sheriff said. So Crum quickly, almost instantaneously, became our number 1 suspect in the Jennifer Odom case, Lynn has said. After identifying Crum as a suspect in Odom's killing, investigators worked for years to gather enough evidence against Crum, ultimately presenting the case to the state attorney to pursue charges against him. Lynn has said, I have confidence that we have the right person, and that we have the right aggravators in this particular case to treat it as a death penalty case, Gladson said Thursday. 7. Gretchen Herrington, an 83-year-old former reverend, has been arrested for allegedly killing an 8-year-old girl in 1975 while she was on her way to his Bible camp, authorities said. On August 15, 1975, Gretchen Harrington was walking alone to her last day of camp in Marple Township, Pennsylvania, when the suspect, David Zanstra, allegedly drove up to her in his green station wagon, prosecutors said. Zanstra was a reverend at the camp and a friend of the Harrington family, Delaware County District Attorney Jack Stolstemmer said at a Monday news conference. Zanstra was also the father of one of Gretchen's friends, so the 8-year-old got in his car. Stolstemmer said. Zanstra confessed to police last week. According to the criminal complaint, Zanstra allegedly told authorities that once he got Gretchen in his car, he drove to a secure location. Zanstra then asked Gretchen to take off her clothes, and when she refused, he allegedly beat her to death with his hands, Stolstemmer said. Zanstra allegedly disposed of her body and then went back to the church, Stolstemmer said. This man is evil, Stolstemmer said. Zanstra, who later served as a reverend in Texas and Georgia, now lives in Marietta, Georgia, officials said. He is in custody in Georgia on charges including criminal homicide and is fighting extradition, Stolstemmer said. According to the criminal complaint, multiple witnesses saw Gretchen talking to the driver of a green station wagon, and multiple witnesses, and Zanstra himself, placed Zanstra driving on the road where Gretchen was seen walking to camp. Zanstra also allegedly gave authorities specific descriptions of Gretchen's clothes, even though he had denied seeing Gretchen that day. According to the criminal complaint, this January, prosecutors said authorities interviewed a woman who was best friends with Zanstra's daughter when they were children. She told police that at one sleepover at Zanstra's house when she was 10, she was awakened by Zanstra groping her, prosecutors said. When she told Zanstra's daughter, the daughter allegedly replied that her dad does that sometimes. According to the criminal complaint, the Harrington family said in a statement released by prosecutors, "We are extremely hopeful that the person who is responsible for the heinous crime that was committed against our Gretchen will be held accountable. If you met Gretchen, you were instantly her friend. She exuded kindness to all and was sweet and gentle," the family said. "We are grateful for the continual pursuit of justice by law enforcement, and we want to thank the Pennsylvania State Police for never stopping in their constant search for answers. We would not be here today if it was not for them."